Welcome to True Crime Stories for English Learners, where real-life mysteries meet clear and simple English.
The Perfect Family, the Chris Watts case. The neighbor's security camera captured it all. In the early morning darkness of August 13th, 2018, a man walked back and forth from his house to his truck, loading something into the vehicle. The footage was grainy and dark, but you could see him clearly enough. He moved quickly, purposefully, like someone who had a job to do and wanted to finish it before the sun came up. Hours later, that same man would stand in front of television cameras with tears in his eyes, begging for his missing wife and daughters to come home. "Shannon, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back," he said, his voice breaking. "I love you so much." But Chris Watts already knew his family would never come home because he had killed them. His pregnant wife, his two little daughters, ages 4 and 3. And that morning, in the darkness captured by his neighbor's camera, he had been loading their bodies into his truck to hide them where he hoped no one would ever find them. This is the story of how a seemingly perfect family was destroyed in one night, how a father became a family annihilator, and how lies unraveled when confronted with evidence that couldn't be denied. The perfect life on social media. If you had looked at Shanann Watts' Facebook page in the summer of 2018, you would have seen what appeared to be a perfect life. Beautiful photos of a happy family. Shanann, 34, glowing and pregnant with their third child. Chris, 33, a handsome husband who seemed devoted to his wife. And their two daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, adorable little girls with bright smiles. Shanann posted frequently on social media. She shared photos of family outings, vacations, and everyday moments. She worked from home selling health and wellness products for a multi-level marketing company called Lavelle, promoting their Thrive product line. Her posts were always positive, always showing a life of happiness and success. The family lived in Frederick, Colorado, a small town about 30 miles north of Denver. They had a nice house in a new development. Chris worked in the oil fields as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. They seemed like a typical American family, working hard, raising their kids, building a life together. But social media doesn't tell the whole story. Behind the perfect photos and happy posts, the Watts family was struggling. They were deep in debt, facing possible bankruptcy. Their house was in danger of foreclosure. The financial pressure was enormous and constant. Chris and Shanann's marriage had problems too, though these weren't visible on Facebook. They had gone through a rough patch earlier in the year. Chris had grown distant and cold. Shanann couldn't understand what was happening. She tried to reconnect with him to fix whatever was broken. She thought maybe the stress of another baby was affecting him. She hoped things would get better. What Shanann didn't know was that Chris had started an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. The affair had begun in June 2018, just 2 months before the murders. Chris had told Nicole his marriage was over, that he was getting divorced, that he and his wife were just going through the motions until they could separate. This was a lie. Shanann had no idea Chris wanted a divorce. She thought they were working through a difficult time in their marriage. Chris became obsessed with Nicole. He saw a new life with her, a life without the financial pressures, without the responsibilities of 2 young children and another baby on the way, without the complications of his current existence. He wanted a fresh start, and in his mind, There was only one way to get it. The last weekend. In early August 2018, Shanann went to Arizona for a work trip with Lavelle. She was gone for several days, attending a convention and spending time with coworkers. While she was away, Chris had the house to himself with the girls. He also spent time with Nicole, going out to dinner, acting like a single man exploring a new relationship. During this time, Chris searched for things on the internet that would later become crucial evidence. He looked up information about how to hide bodies, about whether bodies would float after being submerged in oil, about the lyrics to a Metallica song called Battery, which includes violent imagery. These searches painted a disturbing picture of what Chris was planning. Shanann returned home very early on Monday morning, August 13th. A friend had driven her home from the airport, dropping her off around 2 a.m. Security footage from their doorbell camera captured Shanann arriving home with her suitcase. It was the last time she would be seen alive. What happened in that house over the next few hours, only Chris truly knows. He would later give multiple versions of events, changing his story as evidence emerged. But the basic, horrible truth is this: Chris murdered Shanann in their bedroom. Then, according to his later confession, his daughters woke up. Bella asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris loaded Shanann's body into his truck. Then he put his 2 living daughters in the truck too, making them ride to a remote oil field with their dead mother's body. Once there, at the oil site where he worked, he smothered his daughters, one by one. He pushed their small bodies through 8-inch hatches into oil tanks filled with crude oil. Then he buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. After committing these unthinkable acts, Chris went to work as if it was a normal day. He sent text messages to Shanann's phone, pretending he didn't know where she was. When coworkers asked about his weekend, he acted normally. He was planning to pretend his family had simply disappeared, that perhaps Shanann had taken the girls and left. But he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated how quickly people would realize something was wrong. The investigation begins. Shanann had a close friend named Nicole Atkinson. When Shanann didn't respond to text messages on Monday morning and missed a prenatal doctor's appointment, Nicole became worried. This wasn't like Shanann at all. She always responded to messages. She never missed appointments, especially for her pregnancy. Nicole went to the Watts house. No one answered the door. Shanann's car was in the garage, but the house was locked and quiet. Nicole could see through windows that Shanann's purse and phone were inside. Something was very wrong. Shanann wouldn't leave her phone behind. She wouldn't miss her appointment without telling anyone. Nicole called the police. Officers arrived at the house around 1:40 p.m. on Monday, August 13th. Chris was at work when he got the call that police were at his house, looking for his family. He drove home immediately. When Chris arrived, he spoke with the officers. He seemed concerned but oddly calm. He said Shanann had gone to a friend's house that morning with the girls. He said she had texted him saying she was taking the girls to a play date. But he couldn't explain why her phone and purse were in the house, why her car was in the garage, or why no one could reach her. The police asked if they could look around the house. Chris agreed. Officers searched but found no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence. The house was neat and quiet. Shanann's wedding ring was on the nightstand, unusual for a woman who was supposedly out with her children. As the hours passed, more people became involved. Shanann's family in North Carolina was contacted. They were frantic with worry. Her father flew to Colorado immediately. Friends gathered at the house, organizing search efforts, posting on social media, contacting hospitals and shelters. Everyone was desperately trying to find Shanann and the girls. Chris participated in all of this. He spoke with police multiple times. He gave a television interview that evening, standing outside his house, pleading for his family to come home. "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back," he said, his voice emotional. "I just want to see you guys again." But investigators were already suspicious. Chris's behavior wasn't quite right. He seemed more composed than you would expect from a man whose pregnant wife and 2 young daughters had vanished. His tears seemed forced. His story kept changing in small ways. And most importantly, his timeline didn't make sense. Chris claimed Shanann had left with the girls around 5:15 that morning. But the neighbor's security camera footage showed Chris loading his truck in the early morning darkness before the sun came up. The footage didn't show Shanann or the girls leaving the house. In fact, the footage didn't show anyone else entering or leaving the house that morning except Chris. Police obtained the security footage from the neighbor. When they showed it to Chris and asked him to explain what he was loading into his truck, he became visibly nervous. He said it was just work tools and equipment, but his body language told a different story. He was sweating, shifting his weight, avoiding eye contact. The confession. By Tuesday morning, less than 24 hours after Shanann was reported missing, investigators knew Chris was lying. They asked him to come to the police station for further questioning. He agreed, still maintaining his story that Shanann had left with the girls. At the police station, investigators conducted a polygraph test. Chris failed it badly. The test indicated he was being deceptive about virtually everything related to his family's disappearance. When confronted with these results, Chris's story changed. He admitted he had an affair. He said he and Shanann had an argument that morning. Then, he claimed he told Shanann he wanted a separation. According to this new version of events, Shanann became emotional and went upstairs. When Chris followed her, he said he saw her strangling one of their daughters on a baby monitor. He ran upstairs and found Shanann had already killed both Bella and Celeste. Chris claimed that in a rage over seeing his daughters dead, he then strangled Shanann. He said he put all 3 bodies in his truck and took them to an oil field where he worked. He said he buried Shanann and hid the girls' bodies in oil tanks because he panicked and didn't know what else to do. This story was absurd. It made no sense. Why would Shanann kill her own daughters? She loved those girls more than anything. She was excited about her pregnancy. She had no history of violence or mental illness. And if what Chris said was true, why did he hide the bodies instead of calling 911? Why did he go to work and act like everything was normal? Why did he lie to police and go on television pretending to look for his family? But Chris's new story gave police what they needed, a confession that he had killed Shanann and knew where the bodies were. They arrested him immediately and sent teams to the oil field he described. The horrible discovery. At the Survey 319 oil field site where Chris worked, investigators found exactly what he had described. In a shallow grave, they found Shanann's body. She was still wearing her wedding ring and the t-shirt she had on when she arrived home from her trip. The autopsy would later confirm she had been strangled. Nearby were 3 oil tanks. In 2 of them, investigators found the bodies of Bella and Celeste. The little girls had been pushed through 8-inch hatches, openings so small that their bodies had to be pulled out in pieces. They had been submerged in crude oil for days. The oil had to be drained from the tanks before the bodies could be recovered. The image of those little girls' bodies being stuffed into oil tanks, left in the dark, surrounded by crude oil, is something the investigators involved have said they will never forget. It was one of the most disturbing crime scenes they had ever encountered. The autopsy results were devastating. Both girls had been smothered. Bella had fought back. She had bitten her tongue severely, evidence that she struggled against whoever was killing her. She was 4 years old enough to understand something terrible was happening. young enough to be completely helpless against an adult man. Shanann had also been strangled. The medical examiner determined she was pregnant with a boy, as she and Chris had already known. They had planned to name him Nico. Now all four of them, Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico, were gone. The evidence completely contradicted Chris's story about Shanann killing the girls. The medical evidence, the timeline, and the forensics all pointed to one conclusion. Chris Watts had killed his entire family. His story about Shanann killing the girls was just another lie, an attempt to make himself seem less monstrous by claiming he was reacting to his wife's violence rather than acting on his own. The truth emerged. Over the following weeks and months, as investigators dug deeper, the full picture of what happened emerged. They interviewed Nicole Kessinger, the woman Chris had been having an affair with. She was shocked and horrified. She had believed Chris when he said his marriage was essentially over, that he was in the process of separating from his wife. She had no idea he was planning to murder his family. However, phone records showed that Nicole had searched online for information about Shanann, looking up her Facebook page and trying to learn about Chris's wife. She had also searched for wedding dresses and looked up information about Amber Frey, the woman who had been dating Scott Peterson when he murdered his pregnant wife, Lacey. These searches happened before the murders, suggesting Nicole may have had some awareness that Chris's situation was more complicated than he claimed. Nicole cooperated with investigators and was never charged with any crime. But the investigation revealed that Chris's desire to be with her was a major motive for the murders. He wanted a new life without the complications of his current family. He saw Shanann, Bella, and Celeste as obstacles to the life he wanted. Financial problems were also a factor. The Watts family was deeply in debt, facing possible bankruptcy and foreclosure. Chris may have seen murdering his family as a way to escape these financial burdens as well. But ultimately, the motive was selfishness. Chris wanted what he wanted, and he was willing to kill his own wife and children to get it. There's no complex psychological explanation, no traumatic event that explains his actions. He simply decided his desires were more important than their lives. In November 2018, Chris pled guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, 5 life sentences, plus additional time for other charges. There would be no trial, no opportunity for him to tell his lies in front of a jury. The full confession. In February 2019, while in prison, Chris gave a full confession to investigators. This time, he told what appears to be the truth, though even this confession may contain lies designed to make him seem less evil. According to this final version, Chris killed Shanann first, strangling her in their bedroom early that morning. Bella and Celeste were asleep in their rooms. Chris wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet and loaded it into his truck. Then he woke up the girls, telling them they were going for a drive to see the site where their mother was going to work. He strapped them into their car seats in the back of the truck. They rode for about 45 minutes to the oil field, with their dead mother's body in the truck with them. At the oil site, Chris unloaded Shanann's body and began digging her grave. 4-year-old Bella watched from the truck, seeing everything. She asked what he was doing with Mommy. Chris told her Shanann was sick and he was taking care of her. After burying Shanann, Chris smothered Celeste, the younger daughter. He did this while Bella watched. Then he smothered Bella. In his confession, Chris said that Bella's last words were, "Daddy, no." She knew what was about to happen. She knew her father was going to kill her, just like he had killed her little sister. Chris then pushed both girls' bodies through the 8-inch hatches into the oil tanks. He covered Shanann's grave with dirt. Then he went to work, acting as if nothing had happened. This confession was even more horrific than the previous version. Chris had made his daughters witness their mother's death and ride with her body. He had killed the younger daughter while the older one watched. He had ignored his 4-year-old daughter's pleas as he murdered her. The level of cruelty was almost incomprehensible. The body cam footage. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the Chris Watts case is the police body cam footage from the first day of the investigation. This footage, which was later released to the public, shows Chris at home with police officers pretending to be a worried husband and father. In the footage, Chris walks through his house with officers, pointing out Shanann's phone and purse, showing them the girls' bedrooms. He seems nervous but tries to appear helpful. He offers explanations for why Shanann might have left. He acts confused about where his family could be. But knowing what we know now, watching this footage is disturbing. Every word Chris says is a lie. Every expression of concern is an act. As he talks about wanting his family to come home, their bodies are already in an oil field where he left them hours earlier. The footage shows Chris's friend Nicole Atkinson, who reported Shanann missing. Nicole is genuinely frantic with worry. You can see real fear and concern on her face. The contrast between her authentic emotion and Chris's performance is stark. At one point in the footage, Chris stands in his daughter's bedroom, looking at their beds. He knows they're dead. He killed them. But he stands there telling police he hopes they're okay, that he wants them to come home. The coldness required to do this, to stand in his dead daughter's room and lie to police while their bodies decompose in oil tanks, suggests a profound lack of empathy or human feeling. This footage went viral after the case became public. Millions of people watched it, trying to see signs that Chris was lying, trying to understand how someone could be so deceptive. Body language experts analyzed every movement and expression. Everyone wanted to believe that evil would be obvious, that you could look at someone and know they were a murderer. But the footage shows that's not always true. Chris Watts looked like an ordinary worried husband. If you didn't know the truth, you might have believed him. This is a disturbing reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind a friendly face and convincing lies. The reaction. The Chris Watts case generated enormous public attention. It had elements that fascinated and horrified people. The seemingly perfect family, the social media presence that showed a happy life, the shocking revelation of what really happened, and the questions about how someone could kill their own children. Shanann's family was devastated. They had loved Chris like a son. They had trusted him with their daughter and grandchildren. Now they had to come to terms with the fact that he had murdered all of them. Shanann's brother, Frankie Rusak, spoke publicly about the case, trying to keep his sister's memory alive and raise awareness about family violence. The case also highlighted the dark side of social media. Shanann had shared so much of her life online, creating an image of happiness and success. But behind that image was financial stress, marital problems, and a husband planning to kill her. The contrast between the social media version of the Watts family and the reality was jarring and led to discussions about how social media can create false impressions of people's lives. Some people on the internet, sadly, blamed Shanann. They criticized her for posting too much on social media, for working in multi-level marketing, for various aspects of her personality that they could see in her videos and posts. This victim blaming was disgusting and revealed the worst of internet culture. Nothing Shanann did or didn't do justifies what Chris did to her and their children. Others focused on trying to understand Chris's motives, as if there might be some explanation that would make his actions comprehensible. But family annihilators like Chris Watts don't have understandable motives in the normal sense. They're extraordinarily selfish individuals who see their family members as possessions or obstacles, rather than as people with their own rights to life. When the family no longer serves their needs or gets in the way of what they want, they eliminate them. The case also brought attention to the phenomenon of family annihilation, when a family member, almost always the father, kills the entire family. This is thankfully rare, but it happens more often than most people realize. In the United States, a family member kills multiple family members about once every 5 days. Usually, it's a father killing his wife and children. These crimes often share common characteristics: financial stress, a failing marriage, the killer's desire to start a new life, and a profound narcissism that allows the killer to see their family members as extensions of themselves, rather than as people with their own rights to life. When the family no longer serves their needs or gets in the way of what they want, they eliminate them. The case also brought attention to the phenomenon of family annihilation, when a family member, almost always the father, kills the entire family. This is thankfully rare, but it happens more often than most people realize. In the United States, a family member kills multiple family members about once every 5 days. Usually, it's a father killing his wife and children. These crimes often share common characteristics: financial stress, a failing marriage, the killer's desire to start a new life, and a profound narcissism that allows the killer to see their family members as extensions of themselves rather than as independent people. Chris Watts fit this profile perfectly. Life in prison. Chris Watts is currently serving his life sentences at a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. He was transferred out of Colorado for his own safety. He had received death threats and was at risk of being attacked by other inmates. In prison, Chris has given several interviews, though his family has asked him to stop talking to the media. In these interviews, he continues to try to explain his actions, sometimes claiming to have found religion, sometimes expressing remorse, but often seeming more concerned with how he's perceived than with the lives he took. He receives letters from women who write to him, a phenomenon called hybristophilia, attraction to people who have committed serious crimes. Some of these women claim to believe he's innocent or that he had reasons for what he did. This is disturbing, but not uncommon for high-profile criminals. Chris will never leave prison. He will grow old there and eventually die there. He will never have the fresh start he wanted. He will never be with Nicole Kessinger or anyone else. He will spend decades thinking about what he did, seeing the faces of his daughters in his mind, remembering their last moments. At least, we can hope he does. Some people think life in prison is too easy for what Chris did. They believe he should have received the death penalty. Others think life in prison is actually worse. Decades of confinement, of being known forever as the man who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 little girls, of living with that guilt, if he's capable of feeling guilt, for the rest of his life. Shanann's family wanted him to plead guilty and accept life in prison to avoid a trial. They didn't want to sit through weeks of testimony, seeing autopsy photos, hearing details of how their loved ones died. They wanted it to be over so they could begin the impossible process of grieving and healing. Chris's guilty plea gave them that, at least. Remembering the victims. When we tell the story of Chris Watts, it's important to remember that this isn't really a story about him. It's a story about Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico, 4 innocent people whose lives were stolen by someone who should have protected them. Shanann Ruzak Watts was 34 years old. She was a devoted mother who loved her daughters intensely. She was excited about her pregnancy and looking forward to welcoming her son. She worked hard to support her family and tried her best to make her marriage work. She was kind to her friends and loved by her family. She deserved so much better than what happened to her. Bella Marie Watts was 4 years old. She was smart, curious, and loving. She adored her little sister and was excited about becoming a big sister again. She should have started kindergarten that fall. She should have learned to read, made friends, grown up, had her own life. Instead, her life was cut short by the person she trusted most in the world. Celeste Catherine Watts was 3 years old. She was sweet, playful, and full of life. She loved her family and her toys and all the simple joys of being a small child. She had barely begun to experience life when it was taken from her. And Nico Lee Watts never got a chance at life at all. He would have been born in January 2019. Shanann and Chris had already picked out his name. His big sisters would have loved him. But he died before he could even be born, killed along with his mother. These 4 people are who we should remember from this case. Not Chris Watts, the murderer, but Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, a family that should still be here, living their lives, making memories, growing and changing, and experiencing all the things that make life worth living. Shanann's family has tried to keep their memory alive in positive ways. They've advocated for domestic violence awareness and have shared memories of Shanann and the girls to ensure they're remembered as people, not just as victims. This is how we should remember them, as beloved family members who are missed every single day, not as characters in a true crime story. Understanding family annihilation. The Chris Watts case is an example of what criminologists call family annihilation, when one family member murders multiple or all other members of the family. Understanding this phenomenon doesn't excuse it, but it might help prevent future tragedies. Family annihilators are almost always men, usually fathers or husbands. They typically fit one of several profiles. The self-righteous killer believes the family has disappointed him in some way and deserves to be punished. These killers often have a history of domestic violence and control issues. The disappointed killer sees himself as a failure and believes his family would be better off dead than living with his failure. These killers often commit suicide after killing their families. The paranoid killer believes the family is in danger from outside threats and kills them to protect them from imagined harm. These killers often have serious mental illness. The self-centered killer sees the family as an obstacle to something he wants: a new relationship, a different life, freedom from responsibility. He eliminates the obstacle. This is the category Chris Watts falls into. Self-centered family annihilators are often having affairs. They want to start fresh with a new partner. But rather than divorce, which would mean financial obligations, shared custody, and continued connection to their old life, they choose murder. In their narcissistic worldview, their desires matter more than other people's lives, even their own children's lives. These killers rarely have a history of serious violence before the family annihilation. They may have been controlling or emotionally abusive, but often there are no obvious warning signs that they're capable of murder. This makes prevention very difficult. However, there are sometimes red flags: growing distance in the relationship, sudden changes in behavior, the presence of an affair, financial stress, and signs of depression or desperation. None of these things necessarily mean someone will commit violence, but they're factors that appear frequently in family annihilation cases. The sad truth is that for some men, when they feel their control slipping or their life falling apart, their response is to destroy everything rather than accept loss or change. They would rather kill their families than let them exist without the killer being the center of their lives. Lessons from a tragedy. What can we learn from the Chris Watts case? What lessons can help prevent similar tragedies in the future? First, social media doesn't tell the whole story. The Watts family looked perfect online, but they were struggling with serious problems. We should remember this when we look at anyone's social media presence. The highlight reel people share online rarely reflects the full reality of their lives. Second, when someone you love suddenly becomes distant or changes dramatically, take it seriously. Shannon knew something was wrong with Chris, but she didn't know how wrong. She thought maybe it was stress about the new baby. She hoped things would improve. But Chris was planning murder. When someone's behavior changes dramatically, especially if they become emotionally detached from their family, it's worth investigating and possibly seeking help. Third, affairs don't cause murder. Lots of people have affairs without killing anyone. Chris Watts chose to murder his family. The affair was part of his motive, but it wasn't the cause. The cause was his profound selfishness and lack of empathy. Placing blame on the affair or on Nicole Kessinger misses the point. Chris made the decision to kill. Fourth, financial stress can contribute to family violence. Money problems create pressure, and some people respond to that pressure with violence. If you're struggling financially, seek help from family, from social services, from financial counselors. Don't let pride or shame prevent you from getting support. Fifth, trust your instincts. Nicole Atkinson knew immediately that something was wrong when Shannon didn't respond to messages or show up to her appointment. She didn't wait or make excuses. She called police right away. Her quick action meant Chris was caught within hours rather than days or weeks. If something feels wrong, act on that feeling. Finally, remember that people are not property. The fundamental problem with family annihilators like Chris Watts is that they see their family members as extensions of themselves, rather than as independent people with their own right to life. When a relationship ends, when life doesn't go as planned, the healthy response is to adapt and move forward. The murderous response is to try to destroy what you can't control. Teaching boys and men to respect others' autonomy, to handle rejection and disappointment, to see relationships as partnerships between equals rather than as ownership, these things might help prevent future tragedies. The lasting impact. The Chris Watts case continues to fascinate and horrify people years after it happened. True crime documentaries, television specials, and countless online discussions have examined every aspect of the case. Why does it capture attention so powerfully? Perhaps it's because the case shatters our sense of safety. If Chris Watts, a seemingly normal guy, a father with a regular job and a nice house, could kill his entire family, then how can we trust anyone? The case reminds us that evil doesn't always look like we expect it to look. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor, a coworker, a friend. Or perhaps it's because we want to believe we would see the signs, that we would know if someone close to us was capable of such things. We analyze Chris's behavior, looking for clues that reveal his true nature. We want to believe that if we were Shannon's friend, we would have noticed something wrong and prevented the tragedy. But the truth is, Chris fooled almost everyone. His coworkers were shocked. His neighbors were stunned. Even Shannon, who lived with him and knew something was wrong in their marriage, never imagined he would kill her and their children. Evil can be very good at hiding. The case also resonates because it involves children. Bella and Celeste were innocent victims who trusted their father completely. They couldn't defend themselves or escape. Their murders are particularly tragic and enraging because they were so helpless and their trust was so completely betrayed. For Shannon's family, the impact will last forever. They lost a daughter, 2 granddaughters, and an unborn grandson all at once. They have to live with the knowledge that someone they welcomed into their family, someone they loved, destroyed everyone they held most dear. The grief and trauma from this will never fully heal. The case has also had an impact on discussions about domestic violence and family annihilation. While Chris Watts didn't have a documented history of physical violence, his need for control and his emotional manipulation were forms of abuse. The case has highlighted how emotional abuse and control can be precursors to physical violence, though certainly not always. Final thoughts. The Chris Watts case is ultimately about the destruction of innocence. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico were innocent. They didn't deserve what happened to them. They were murdered for the most selfish of reasons, because Chris Watts wanted a different life and saw them as obstacles. There is no complex psychological explanation that makes this understandable. Chris was not insane. He was not acting in self-defense. He was not protecting his children from something worse. He simply decided that what he wanted, freedom, a new relationship, escape from his responsibilities, was more important than his family's lives. The case reminds us that some of the most dangerous people are not strangers lurking in dark alleys. They're people we know, people we trust, people who seem normal until they reveal what they're truly capable of. Family members are more likely to be killed by someone they know than by a stranger. The danger is often closest to home. But the case also shows that the truth eventually comes out. Chris Watts thought he could commit the perfect crime, that he could make his family disappear and start fresh. He underestimated how quickly people would realize something was wrong, how much evidence he would leave behind, and how technology, from doorbell cameras to cell phone records to GPS data, would reveal his lies. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, and that is just. But justice doesn't bring back Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. It doesn't undo the harm. It doesn't heal the wounds left in their family and community. It just ensures that Chris Watts can never hurt anyone else, and that he pays a price for what he did. As we tell this story, we must remember that it's not entertainment. It's not just a puzzle to solve or a mystery to unravel. It's a real tragedy that destroyed real lives. Behind every statistic about domestic violence, behind every family annihilation case, there are real people who suffered and died. Shanann Watts was a real person who loved her family and tried her best in life. Bella and Celeste were real little girls with personalities and dreams and futures that were stolen from them. Baby Nico never got a chance to live at all. They deserve to be remembered not as victims in a true crime story, but as people who mattered, who were loved, who should still be here. The lesson of Chris Watts is not that we should be paranoid or suspicious of everyone around us. It's that we should pay attention when something feels wrong, speak up when we see concerning signs, and above all, remember that every person has inherent value and a right to life that no one else's desires can override. Chris Watts made a choice, the worst possible choice. He chose murder over divorce, destruction over honesty, selfishness over love. And now he will live with that choice for the rest of his life, while the people he killed will never get another choice, another chance, another day. That is the real tragedy of this case. Not what Chris Watts lost, but what Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico lost. Everything. And nothing can ever give that back.
Another dark chapter closed, but the mystery of human nature continues. Thanks for listening to True Crime Stories for English Learners. Don't forget to subscribe and join me next time for another real story that's stranger than fiction.